All right, so we're diving headfirst into Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Get ready for a world of, 19th century England, families obsessed with marrying off their daughters, and, those classic love-hate relationships Austen is known for. But don't worry, we'll guide you through all the important bits and pieces.
Sounds fun.
Right, and Austen doesn't waste any time, setting the stage, that very first line. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. I mean, talk about cutting to the chase.
Hmm.
But it's not quite as simple as it sounds, right?
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that Austen kind of cleverly flips the script, you see. It's not just the single man who's the target. It's his fortune that everyone's after. We're thrown into the society obsessed with social status, where marriage is as much about, well, economics as it is about love. Women like the Bennet daughters, they had limited options, a good marriage or the uncertainty of becoming a spinster, which, let's face it, wasn't a great prospect back then.
And the Bennets have 5 daughters to marry off. Talk about pressure, right? Especially for Mrs. Bennet. She acts like a wedding ring is the ultimate prize.
Oh, absolutely. Mrs. Bennet is like the embodiment of that ambition to climb the social ladder. But then there's Mr. Bennet, her complete opposite. He's witty, observant, and he sees right through this whole marriage market craziness.
He's always got these like sly little remarks about his wife's schemes.
Exactly. And that contrast between them, between her relentless pursuit of husbands and his more amused, detached perspective, it creates this wonderful tension that really drives a lot of the humor and social commentary in the novel.
And then, of course, right in the thick of it are the Bennet sisters. Each daughter has her own personality. It's like Austen's giving us like a whole spectrum of how women dealt with these societal pressures. And then, just as things are heating up with the Bennets, in come the men who'll turn everything upside down.
Oh, absolutely. Enter Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy, the catalysts for all the romantic chaos.
Bingley, he's like the, what do they call it? The total package, right? Single, rich, charming. Mrs. Bennet practically faints when he starts taking an interest in Jane. But Bingley's friend, Mr. Darcy, oh boy, he's a whole different story.
Darcy's our prime example of the landed gentry. Proud, reserved, and his first impression on the Bennets, let's just say, it wasn't great. Especially that infamous snub of Elizabeth at the ball.
Ouch.
You can practically feel the iciness radiating off the page. No wonder Elizabeth isn't a fan. But is Darcy really as arrogant as he seems? What do you think?
Well, that's the fascinating thing about Darcy. Austen uses him to really delve into how much our upbringing shapes us. He's a product of his class, raised with this sense of, inherent superiority. It's not necessarily that he's malicious. It's more like his aloofness. It comes from his idea of how a gentleman should act. But of course, to someone like Elizabeth, who values wit and genuineness, he just comes across as, kind of a jerk. And then there's Wickham. Oh, Wickham, the handsome soldier with the sob story about how terribly Darcy treated him. Can't help but feel a little sorry for the guy, at least at first.
Wickham, he's like Austen's masterclass in crafting a charming rogue. Good looks, a sob story, and a talent for playing the victim. He knows how to work people, especially the Bennets. Before you know it, he's got them eating out of his hand and, of course, completely turned against Darcy.
And Elizabeth, already not a fan of Darcy, she falls for it. Hook, line, and sinker.
This is where Austen really drives home the dangers of letting pride and prejudice cloud our judgment. Elizabeth, she takes Wickham at his word and lets her dislike of Darcy fill in the blanks. She's blinded by charm and hurt pride, and she doesn't see the truth about either man.
It's like that saying, you can't judge a book by its cover. And Austen, she was the queen of weaving a good deception.
Absolutely. She plays with our sympathies, leads us down the garden path, just like she does with Elizabeth. But it's a good reminder for all of us, right? To think critically, to not believe everything we hear, and to look past the surface to see the true character underneath.
And if all this wasn't enough drama for one book, Austen throws Mr. Collins into the mix. Ugh, what a character, right?
Oh, Mr. Collins. He's Austen's way of poking fun at social climbers and people who are just so blindly ambitious. This guy, he's obsessed with his patron, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and thinks that marrying a Bennet daughter will somehow boost his own status.
He sets his sights on Elizabeth. Can you believe it? He's completely clueless about how much she dislikes him.
And that proposal scene. It's a classic Austen. Elizabeth's refusal, it's so unexpected and so bold. She refuses to be pressured into a loveless marriage, even if it means rejecting security.
And then we see her close friend, Charlotte, actually accept Mr. Collins's proposal. I mean, talk about a twist.
It's a tough moment, right? Because on the one hand, you can see why Charlotte does it. A good marriage meant security in those days. Austen doesn't sugarcoat that. But it also shows us that good didn't always mean love. Sometimes it was just about, well, survival.
Exactly. But let's get back to our main couple, shall we? Darcy and Elizabeth. How does Austen finally bring these two together after all that?
Their story's really about how much we can grow if we're willing to look at ourselves honestly. We finally see Wickham for what he is, a complete fraud. And then there's Darcy stepping in to save Lydia. Talk about a hero moment. It really shows us his true character.
It's like finally they can see each other clearly, without all that pride and prejudice in the way.
Right. Elizabeth, she realizes that she totally misjudged Darcy. And Darcy, well, he realizes he needs to be a bit less arrogant and a bit more humble.
And then we get that second proposal scene, the one we've all been waiting for. So good.
This time, it's different, right?
Yeah.
Darcy's not being all proud and stuffy. He's sincere. He's vulnerable. He loves Elizabeth for who she is, not for her family or her connections.
It's perfect. And of course, we get the happy ending. Both couples, Elizabeth and Darcy and Jane and Bingley, they get their happily ever after.
Yeah.
But even with all the romance, Austen never lets us forget about, the bigger picture.
Exactly. It's a happy ending, but it doesn't erase the reality of their world. There's still social hierarchies. Women still have limited choices. Austen was such a clever writer. Even in the midst of all the celebrations, she's reminding us that things aren't perfect.
So we finished this amazing book with so much to think about. Love, society, and how important it is to look past our own biases. Pride and Prejudice is one of those books that really stays with you.
It really does. And it leaves us with a question, for today's world. In our world of social media and instant judgments, how do we make sure we're not letting pride and prejudice get in the way of seeing people for who they truly are? It's something to think about, don't you think?